I'm currently concepting some original characters for Red Feathers, the animated short film that I've been working on, and as a 3D artist stepping foot in a 2D world, I somehow managed to beat a common enemy of many artists. No, I'm not talking about anatomy. The blank canvas. Did I scare you? You quivering? Well, that makes the both of us, but not anymore, because I somehow managed to get from this to this to this. And I believe you can do that too. So I've been concepting for a while now, and I still have some characters that are not finished. As it turns out, drawing is hard. However, after observing the process of some of the character artists on the internet, I started to have a clearer understanding of how to get to the finish line. So let's talk about the 9 steps it took me to get here. This first step is what will help you defeat the blank canvas, and that is to simply identify your character's traits or personality. Because with that, you could start thinking of the elements required for you to bring your character to life. If your character already has a complex backstory, great, but it can also be as simple as
this character is short and has an unusually big pair of forearms,
or
this character is big and angry.
And that was sort of what I went with for this big goon, actually. The inspiration stemmed from when I was choreographing this fight scene, and I knew that I wanted to pay homage to this one scene in Alita Battle Angel, the live-action movie. And this dude, Gruishka, is tall, big, and angry. And with that simple description, I came up with this. That brings us to our next step. Iterate and gather references as you go. That means to create as many iterations as your creative juices allow you to. Avoid refining details in this stage and sketch at a level of detail where you'd feel comfortable enough to discard your entire design. I personally learned that it's really important not to settle down too quickly with an idea, because it could be one iteration away from coming up with a better idea. But it's also really important to not be too disheartened by an iteration that you deemed as bad. Of course, iterate within your means, set a deadline, and don't let the scope creep too much. Now, what do I mean by gather references as you go? Sure, it's good to have some references already gathered before you iterate, but as you iterate, you might come up with new ideas that you wouldn't have thought to gather a reference for. So don't get stuck in the gathering references stage for too long, and just start with some references, then just gather as you go. Once you feel that you've iterated enough, the third step is to sketch out your final design. You could do it in a pose, but for my case, I went for a front view A pose. You could choose to start with one of the iterations that you've already created, but what I did was to merge the best parts of all of my iterations and even made some changes as I go. When I sketched out this big goon, I initially wanted him to be decked out in this steampunk-inspired guard outfit, very reminiscent of the Enforcers in Arcane, but I felt that it didn't quite fit the story that I had in mind, so I ended up with parts of the guard's outfit worn over the goon's clothes. At this stage, try not to be too messy with your sketch. You'll thank yourself later. You want to make sure that the forms are readable. Once that's done, you can now lay out your flat colors, or some of you may call it local colors. The reason why I chose to do it at this stage is because you get a glimpse of what your design would look like when it's finished. And this may sometimes inspire you to improve your designs, such as the function of an equipment, the complexity of your design, etc. Because who knows, you might be overcompensating the details to make up for the lack of colors. The fifth step is line art. Hide the flat colors, lower the opacity of your sketch, and begin drawing. I personally do them without turning on dynamic opacity and dynamic brush size, and that means that the pen pressure does nothing to affect the opacity and the size of my brush. Anyway, the goal here is to retain the forms you have created during your sketch while producing a cleaner version of it. The results may appear very underwhelming at first. It's like you've gone back a whole step and you've lost all concept of how to draw. Well, if you look at your sketch, there's a high chance that you've sketched over the same line more than once, creating a variety of line widths. And that variety is probably a big contributor to the liveliness of your sketch. So we can apply that concept on your line art. The areas that I like to thicken are the creases and crevices, where ambient light is occluded. Basically areas that your light source can't reach. In 3D, we call this phenomenon ambient occlusion. I thicken the lines by increasing the brush size and going over the existing lines that I want to thicken. I also am a fan of thickening outlines of a character, very much like in the early seasons of Attack on Titan. You may be wondering, why not just turn on dynamic brush size? Well, you're right. You could. But I think having to do both drawing lines while maintaining readable forms and tastefully adding line width variation is just too much for my pea brain to handle at the same time. But yes, you totally could. Another fun thing you could do is hatching. So on areas where you need the ambient occlusion shadows to be less harsh or have a more gradual transition, hatching is a great tool to use. You can also see this being applied in the early seasons of Attack on Titan. Now that your line work is done, the next step is to simply clean up your flat colors. Just make sure that the colors are within their respective areas. The 8th step is to add shadows to your flat colors. In this case, I added 2 layers of shadows. A darker shadow layer for the ambient occlusion and a lighter shadow layer to make any contours more readable. This is really for my benefit when it comes time to create a character in 3D. Now, to know where to add your shadows, you have to identify your light source. Gathering lighting references will be extremely helpful, but in this case, I didn't need any as my goal was really clear to ensure that the forms are readable. I went for a simple top-down lighting and darkened the areas that I assume the light will not hit. So it's not entirely accurate, but it's good enough for me. For the shadows on the clothes, I simply used a black brush and set the layer to multiply before lowering the opacity. For the shadows on the skin, I used a reddish-brown brush and also set the layer to multiply before lowering the opacity. The last step is to add any additional details such as the patterns on the guard's vest, fabric details, scratches, etc. And that's it, really. Now, please don't take any of this as hard and fast rules. There are so many ways to go about creating an art piece, and what matters is that you just go and make them. Okay, so what's next for Red Feathers? We're actually getting pretty close to finishing pre-production, but first we have to finish the concept art of the rest of the characters, and I have some changes that I want to make for the fight choreography, so if you don't want to miss any of that, consider subscribing, and if you want to support the film, please consider becoming a member in this channel. Your support will genuinely be very much appreciated. So thank you so much for watching this video, and yeah, bye for now. The blank canvas. 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 Okay. So I've been concepting for